Hi, this is Don Gettner with Ridge Engineering. In this tutorial, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to GPS to LT2, which is the software that you use to collect travel time data in the field. GPS to Laptime 2 uses GPS receivers, and apparently a GPS satellite looks something like what's on the screen here. I just wanted something on the screen for the introduction, but let's get right into GPS to LT2. The way it works is you're going to have a laptop or a netbook. This is a picture of a netbook, which we particularly like because the form factor is really nice for collecting travel time data. But you can use any laptop. You also need a GPS receiver, and this is the GlobalSat BU353, which is the one we've been using for the last several years, although there are dozens of others that will work just as well. And we also recommend that people use a little remote control that we've built into the software. The remote control makes the data collection just a little bit easier and safer, and I'll explain that as we get into the software. So in general, you will have the laptop in your car or truck, and it will be powered by the auto accessory plug because you generally don't want the battery of the laptop to run out in the middle of a run. You'll have the GPS receiver, which has a little magnetic mount on it, on the roof of your car, and this cable will run through the passenger side window and plug into the laptop. And then the remote, if you're using it, you generally would hold in your right hand while you're driving. And in this mode, you only need one person in the car. There's really no reason to have two people in the car. And that's the hardware setup. And if you're going to have multiple cars, of course, you need multiple setups like this. Now, these GPS receivers used to be relatively expensive, but now you can get them for around $30. And these remotes cost around $40 if you buy them yourself. The netbooks can be bought new for around $300, and we often buy netbooks that we are reconditioned, and we clean them up a little bit, put all of our software on it, and offer them for sale on our website. So if you look at the pc-travel.com website, on the items for sale section, you'll often see one or two netbooks available for sale. So that's the hardware. Now I'm going to run GPS to laptop. I'm not going to explain how to install the software. That is explained in the quick directions that come with the software, and it's relatively easy. One of the things that you do need to do is when you install the GPS receiver, you typically need to install the USB serial driver. And again, the quick start instructions detail how to do that. When you do that, the software, your computer will give the GPS receiver a virtual COM port number, and then GPS to laptop needs to know that number in order to connect to the GPS receiver. Now, there's only two screens in this software, so it's relatively simple, and I'll just explain what's going on. First, you have to give the data that you're going to collect a name. And typically, you would use the name of the arterial that you're on. So say you're going to be doing a street named Fowler Avenue, which is one that's here in Florida. And that's all you need. And one little tip about using GPS to laptop is keep the name of the study up here very short. You don't want to have Michigan Avenue north of Remington Street because that will make the run names in PC Travel too long, and they won't fit on the reports, and they won't look good. So make sure you keep the name short, around 10 to 12 characters works fine. And that's really all you need. You don't need to put directions because the directions are put in later. You don't need to put in time of day or dates or times because all that information is associated with the files and visible in the software. So just put something to roughly uh, separate these runs out from some other runs in case you're looking at them on your computer. So we're going to call it Fowler Avenue. And you also can choose where to store the data. And the data folder that is the default is a folder called Data Files, which is under the GPS2LT2 folder. Normally there's no reason to change that, but if you want to, you can change it by just clicking on the tree. You're probably used to doing that in PC Travel. You also need to put in the COM port, and in this case, the computer I'm using, it's COM port 15. And for GPS receiver, normally you're going to be using standard USB. There are some older receivers that we still support, but they're not very common anymore. And normally the baud rate is 4800. There are some newer GPS receivers that will run at higher rates. It doesn't really help the software too much, so don't pay extra for higher baud rates. And then there are three options. One is to enable the remote control, and at the moment it says enable the VersaPoint remote control because the VersaPoint was the model that we were selling for several years. They're a little bit harder to find now, and we find that there are others that work just as well. And the one we typically provide now is made by Kensington. And so if I want to enable the remote control, I check this box. If I need metric view for speeds, if this is in Canada or Europe or whatever, I can change everything so that it shows speeds in kilometers per hour instead of miles per hour. And then there's a sort of an advanced option called input run directions with GPS data. And I'm going to check that right now so I can show you how that works in the next screen. So typically you would drive out to the beginning of the run, not exactly at the run, but in a parking lot, say down the street from where the very first intersection of interest is. Get everything going in the car, get the laptop booted up and running, and get the GPS receiver on the roof plugged in, and put in the study name, check the COM port, make sure all the settings are correct, and when you're ready, click OK, and the software goes to the second screen. And what will happen is you'll see the study name at the top, and as the GPS receiver is getting data from the satellites and passing it on to the software, these fields will be filled in. Now it may take a few seconds for the fields to start filling in. Don't start until everything is looking good, that there's latitudes and longitudes, that the time is incrementing nice and smoothly. If you watch this, you can see that it's changing seconds every second. And early in the connection, it may stutter a little bit, so you want to wait till it's nice and smooth. And if you're driving, the speed will show the speed of the vehicle. Now, I'm just sitting in my office, and the GPS receiver is over by the window, so it's not moving, so the speed is around 0. And the data that is coming off of the GPS receiver is shown at the bottom here, and it has this kind of odd format. It begins with a $, and then typically begins with a G and a P, and these are called sentences. And it's not important that you know what they mean, but if you're having a problem and you're not getting anything down here, especially if it says waiting for data, then there's some problem with the communications between the computer and the GPS receiver. Once everything is working, if this is annoying, you can hide it by just shutting that off. Now, if the background is red or pink, then it's not collecting data. The software is not collecting the data. Even though you can see it, nothing is being stored. We haven't started yet. And so typically you would drive out once you get it this far, you would get the car moving, merge into traffic, and then start the run just before you get to the first intersection. Now, on the previous screen, we enabled the option to input the run direction. So before you start driving on the first run, you can click this and say we're going northbound for the first run. Then I would check northbound. And now the software knows that we're going northbound, and I will actually embed in the data the fact that this run is northbound, and later on in PC travel, that northbound information will show up, and it'll make the data collection a little bit easier, and the analysis back in the office a little bit easier. Now, to be honest, not everybody likes this because you have to do this at the beginning of every run, and a lot of times you forget to do it, and then you've got to fix the data back in the office. So it's optional. Try it. If you like it, great. If you don't, just disable it on the previous screen, and you'll never have to think about it. So now you're in the car. You still haven't moved yet. Everything is working. So now you merge into traffic and you drive towards the first intersection of interest. And before you get to it, a few seconds to 10 seconds before, you hit the start button either on the remote or you hit the R key on the laptop. Now this is why the remote is kind of nice, because without the remote you have to look over at the keyboard, find the R key and press it. It's not that difficult, but having to take your eyes off the road isn't something you always want to do. So if you have the remote, you just press the button on the remote, it starts the run, and remember to do that before you get to the intersection. But you don't have to time it critically at all. And the reason you don't have to time it is because back in the office, when we process this data on the map, we're going to trim the beginning of this run and get rid of the points that we don't want. So any time before you get to the first intersection is fine. So somewhere along the line, it's convenient. I hit the button and it starts. Now, the first thing to notice is that the background turns green. And anytime the background is green, the software, first of all, it's happy because it's getting data from the GPS receiver that makes sense. And second, it's putting the data in the grid, and the grid is what ultimately becomes the data file. So if the background is green, that means the software is collecting data, and you don't have to do anything else. You just drive the entire route. Now, there are some people that like to mark nodes, which are the intersections that define the segments in the route. But to be honest, there's really no reason to anymore. There used to be a reason to do that in previous versions, but now that we have the map in PC Travel, it's really not necessary to mark the nodes. It's still there for those people that, for whatever reason, like to do it, but our advice is don't worry about it. Just drive. Drive the entire route. Stay with the traffic. There are different strategies for driving. You can look those up if you're interested. Generally, you want to stay with the cars around you. If they're driving a little bit fast, but everybody's driving the same way, then you want to keep up with them. If it's congested, then obviously you just don't do anything crazy. So you drive the entire route. When you go past the last intersection that defines the end of the route, you could either pull off the road or make a U-turn. But somewhere right after you've gone past the last intersection, you want to stop the run by clicking the stop run button or pressing the button on your remote or hitting the R key again. So there's always three ways to start and end runs. When you do that, the background turns red, which means we are no longer collecting data. Everything is still working. The GPS receiver is still being read by the software. It's being shown on the screen, but we're not collecting data. And you can see that the grid is no longer doing anything. And we're at run number 1. So now, if I've enabled the run direction, I want to change it to the next direction, which typically is southbound, but isn't always. We at one point we had it so that it would toggle back and forth, but not everybody drives that way. Sometimes people drive in circles where they're continuously essentially going northbound and then southbound and ending up at the beginning, and that's their route. They do that on freeways sometimes. And sometimes people will have multiple routes, so they'll start northbound, then they'll go eastbound for a few miles, then they'll go southbound. And so there's no guarantee that the directions will toggle, so we really couldn't do that. We had to take that back out. So now the run direction is you set it at the beginning of every run. And typically what you would do is you'd go around the block, you'd make a U-turn, you do whatever you had to do to come back towards the beginning of the same route, but from a different direction. And when you get a few seconds in front of the first intersection there, you start the run again, it turns green, and then you just drive. Now we're on run 2, and the background is green, which means it's collecting data. The grid is filling in, and again, you just drive. Now, typically what you'll do is you'll learn to look out of the corner of your eye to make sure that the background is green. You don't have to read any of the numbers. None of that's really important for the driver, but look out of the corner of your eye, make sure the background is green while you're driving. If for some reason the GPS receiver stops working or the USB connector gets yanked out somehow, the software will tell you. It'll start flashing different colors and making noises. So it'll try to get your attention if it's no longer getting good data. And in that case, normally you would turn around, go back to the beginning of the run, and start over again. So you drive back and forth as many times as you can stand it, and then preferably a couple more times, because you can never have too many runs. And go to the end of the run, and then when you're all done and you've done as many runs as you're going to do, then you hit end study. Now, one thing to notice is we didn't end the study at the end of every run. So you don't do that typically. You start the run, you drive, you end the run, you turn around, go around the block, do whatever, and the software never stops running for that entire time. But when I hit end study, it will finally end, it will close, and the software will be stored. The data will be stored, and the software will be ready for processing. Okay, that's a quick introduction to how this works. Next, you want to learn how to process the data in PC Travel. So check the tutorial for that.